I never thought I'd be the kind of guy to get blindsided by something like this. It's not that I was perfect or that my marriage was some fairy tale. I wasn't that naive. But when you're with someone for so long, you get this sense of security. You think you know them. You think they know you. It becomes a rhythm, a routine. Even if it's not always sparks and fireworks, it's comfortable. You take it for granted. Or maybe I did. Laura and I met when we were in our mid-20s. She was this ambitious, sharp, beautiful woman working in marketing. Everyone noticed her. Hell, even I did. And I remember feeling like, wow, how the hell did I pull that off? I was never the outgoing type and definitely not the loud, confident guy. I work in finance, mostly number crunching and problem solving. It's predictable. A bit dry, but I like it. I've always been good with the details, the patterns. I'm calm, thoughtful. Maybe even a little boring compared to Laura's energy. But we clicked. Or at least I thought we did. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but it was solid. At least that's how it felt to me. We built a life together. Our first home. Vacations. Friends. We shared everything. Or I thought we did. But as the years passed, something changed. And honestly, I didn't even see it coming. For a while, I noticed little things. Laura seemed distracted. More distant. She was still stunning, still successful, still doing her thing at the agency. But when we'd have dinner, she was more often scrolling through her phone than actually talking to me. We'd go out for drinks with friends and she'd be off on her phone in the corner. And I'd brush it off because I trusted her. Maybe she was just busy with work. Maybe she had a project. Maybe she was just tired. It wasn't just that though. She wasn't herself. She'd come home from work late, sometimes in a bad mood, sometimes in an almost manic kind of rush. I remember asking her one evening about her day, just trying to make some connection, and she snapped at me, said she didn't have time to talk about her and work drama. I knew the difference between when she was genuinely stressed out and when something was off, but I didn't push it. I didn't want to sound like I was suffocating her. There were other moments too. Simple things maybe, but they stuck with me. Like when she started spending more weekends away for business trips. She'd leave on a Friday morning, and sometimes I wouldn't see her until Sunday night. A few months ago, she started this new pattern of saying she had to attend some marketing conference out of town. She'd leave with her bags packed, the same rushed goodbye, and I'd be left behind, thinking nothing of it. She was successful. She was busy. I understood that, right? Still, I'd sit alone in our house on weekends, replaying conversations we had or the way she seemed to just check out. A bit like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't shake it. The nagging feeling that I was losing her. And I don't mean in some grand romantic way, I mean in the small, everyday things, the way she wouldn't even glance up when I walked into the room, the way she barely looked at me during dinner. The vibe wasn't right, but it wasn't enough for me to say something. It was subtle. The small changes in body language, in the way she spoke to me. They all pointed to one thing though, distance. The truth is, I wanted to trust her. I wanted to believe that nothing had changed. I wanted to keep the narrative in my head that we were fine, that we had this thing. But deep down something felt wrong. It wasn't until one afternoon that everything finally clicked into place. It was a Saturday, a quiet weekend, and I was doing some work at home, catching up on emails. Laura was at one of her business trips, or at least that's what she told me. I was just about to get up to make some coffee when I noticed her phone on the kitchen counter. Normally, she never left her phone unattended, she was always glued to it. But that day it sat there face up. And for some reason I couldn't stop myself from glancing at it. There was a message on the screen, a text from a name I didn't recognize. Are we still on for tonight? I'll make sure the hotel's set. The message was nothing special, really. But there was something about it that made my chest tighten. Maybe it was the tone. The familiarity in the words. The way it implied something secret, something planned. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking. I scrolled through the thread. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. There were more messages. Dozens of them. And they weren't work-related. At all. Can't wait to see you again this weekend. I think about you every day, every hour. Last night was perfect. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. It was clear now. I didn't need to see more, but I couldn't stop myself from scrolling. I saw a picture of her, Laura, at a hotel, in bed with a man I didn't recognize. They were both smiling, laughing, some kind of intimate shot. There was no mistaking it. That was her with Jack. I knew it. Jack, the guy from work. The charming, ambitious guy who was always around. The one who seemed so smooth, so easygoing. He was always the one who made her laugh at company events. The one she'd joke about over dinner, saying how funny he was. I didn't think anything of it. He was just a colleague, right? Someone she respected. I had no reason to doubt that. I had no reason to think anything was wrong. But there it was. Proof. Clear as day. I remember standing there for a few minutes holding her phone in my hand, just feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. Part of me wanted to scream. Wanted to throw it across the room, demand answers right then and there. But I didn't. I just put the phone back down on the counter, sat back down at my desk and tried to focus on my work. I didn't feel anger, not then. I felt sick. Numb. I wasn't sure what I felt, really. I could have lost it. I could have confronted her. I could have exploded. But I didn't want to. I wanted control. I wanted something different. I had to think. I needed time to figure out what to do. To process what had just shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. About my marriage. In that moment, I realized something. I couldn't confront her yet. Not like that. Not with rage. I needed a plan. And I had one brewing. James was always calm. He was always the steady hand, the guy who took the time to think things through. I was going to get back at her. But it wasn't going to be the way she expected. It wasn't going to be through some dramatic confrontation. No, I was going to do this my way. And I would make her understand what it felt like. All of it. Every last bit of it. But first, I needed to disappear. To let the wheels of this plan turn. It's funny how quickly the mind starts working when you realize you've been betrayed. The shock wears off and something else settles in, almost a clarity. Not like some grand moment of enlightenment, but a sharp focus that feels like everything is aligning. I wasn't angry, not yet. Not in that moment, at least. I was calm. I think I needed to be calm. Because the next step wasn't going to be about confronting Laura. It wasn't going to be about tearing everything down in a fit of rage. No, it was going to be about showing her, showing both of us, what had really happened. How she had crossed the line. I knew I couldn't go charging in, demanding answers or crying about the damage to our marriage. That wasn't me. Besides, I had no interest in giving her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble, of seeing me react the way she probably expected. I'd seen it happen before in other relationships, in other stories. Guy gets cheated on, he screams, he throws things, he demands the truth. I wasn't going to play that game. Instead, I needed to step back, pull away and get inside her world in a way she wouldn't expect. That's when the idea hit me. It wasn't exactly a light bulb moment, more like a gradual realization. A way to turn everything she'd done into something far more ironic than she'd ever anticipate. I would use my own creativity, the very thing that kept me calm and focused in my finance job. Numbers and patterns. But in this case, I was going to create a story. A fake one. A second identity. It wasn't about revenge in the conventional sense. It wasn't about the I'll get you back drama. No, this was going to be a lesson. A lesson in trust, in loyalty, and in the consequences of playing with fire. So I did what any methodical guy would do. I built a profile. A fake one. I set up an online persona, someone I would have wanted to be but never had the nerve to be. A successful businessman, maybe a little older than I am, in his late 40s. Divorced. Charming. A little mysterious. I didn't want to be some obvious player, but I also didn't want to be some sad sack. I needed him to be everything I wasn't, at least on the surface. Someone who would catch her attention, who would seem like a viable option. I even threw in a few photos I found online. Nothing too obvious, but enough to give the illusion of a successful life. I chose my words carefully in those early conversations. I wanted to be believable. The story was simple. I'd just gotten out of a bad marriage and I was trying to move on, meet new people. Maybe I was a little vague at first, but I knew how to keep her interested. I was patient, deliberate. I wanted her to come to me. Slowly, cautiously, but steadily. I'd noticed a few things about Laura over the years that would help me now. She wasn't the kind of person to immediately shut down someone she was talking to online. She liked to be adored, liked the idea of being pursued. She was someone who enjoyed attention, and that made her vulnerable in this kind of situation. I knew if I played my cards right, I could get her to open up, to trust me without even thinking twice. It wasn't about the sex. It wasn't even about the flirtation. It was about giving her what she wanted without her even realizing it. Attention, validation, a sense of being wanted in a way that I could never seem to provide anymore. Over the course of a few weeks, we exchanged messages. I kept it light at first, easygoing. I didn't want to push too hard. The idea was to build rapport, to make her feel like she was talking to someone who understood her, someone who got the struggles of her high-powered job, someone who could give her the validation I knew she needed but couldn't get from me. I asked her about her career, her personal life, all the things that would keep her talking without making it feel forced. I shared little bits of my own fabricated life. The odd story here and there about how I was getting over my ex-wife, how hard it was to juggle business and dating, how much I appreciated a woman who was both ambitious and grounded. I knew she'd start asking questions. It was inevitable. And she did. Eventually, the messages turned from casual pleasantries to more personal exchanges. She asked about my divorce, about what went wrong. She told me about her marriage too, about the pressure she felt with work, how difficult it was to find a balance between everything. It was during these exchanges that I saw the cracks. She started telling me things she'd never shared with me. How she missed being pursued. How she felt isolated in her own marriage, like she was doing everything herself. I wasn't surprised. In a way, I'd heard it before, but now it wasn't just a passing comment. Now it was confession. Her guard was down. She mentioned her business trips again. I knew she wasn't just talking about work. I could tell. There was a change in the way she mentioned it. It wasn't just "I have to leave for work," but "I need to get away for a few days." Almost like a getaway. Like she was slipping away from something else. It was too obvious. She was telling me everything without realizing it. And then came the key moment. One night, she told me she was going to be in town for a few days and was looking for something to do, maybe a quiet drink, someone to talk to. I could almost feel her pulling away from Jack, even though she was still wrapped up in their affair. I suggested we meet. Just a casual drink. Nothing serious. I knew it was risky, but I didn't care. It was all part of the plan. She agreed. And just like that, I had her. The next day I bought a new suit. A sharp, black number. A little expensive, a little over the top for my usual style, but I needed to make an impression. I spent the next few hours in front of the mirror, adjusting everything. Hair, suit, posture. I practiced the smile, the laugh, the way I carried myself. I had to be someone else. Someone she wouldn't recognize. Someone she would think was exactly what she needed at that moment. When the night arrived, I was ready. We agreed to meet at a bar, an upscale place I knew she liked. I arrived early, getting a table in the corner just like I'd planned. She showed up a little late, looking flawless, of course. Laura. My wife. The woman I thought I knew. But this time she didn't see me. Not the way she ever had before. I stood up as she walked in. She looked at me, almost confused for a moment, as if she wasn't sure who I was. Then it clicked. She smiled, that nervous but intrigued smile, and walked over. "Hi," she said, her voice a little unsure. "Laura," I said with a smooth, easy smile. "It's great to finally meet you in person." She sat down across from me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. We exchanged pleasantries, but there was something different in the air. She was nervous but intrigued. The attraction was obvious. She was drawn to me, and I knew it. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't sure why, but she was interested. We talked for about 20 minutes. She laughed at my jokes. We shared some stories. It felt oddly familiar but detached. Like I was looking at her through a window. This wasn't the woman I'd been married to. This was someone else entirely. And then, in the middle of the conversation, I said it. "I have to admit something," I said, looking at her calmly. "I know who you are. And I know exactly what's been going on." She froze. The smile dropped. Her face went pale. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make it sound personal. "You and Jack," I said. "I know all about it. Every detail." And I showed her the evidence. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I just showed her. Her face crumpled as she stared at the photos and messages. For a moment she said nothing. It wasn't anger that bubbled up inside me, just that feeling again, the calm, steady certainty that I had her right where I wanted her. "Now you understand how it feels, don't you?" I said, leaning back with a smirk. Her eyes were wide. She didn't know how to react. It was done. For a long while, after I showed Laura the photos and messages, there was nothing but silence. She sat there, staring at the screen of my phone, her face pale. Her lips trembled as she opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was the kind of silence that stretched on, like an awkward pause in a movie, where you just wait for the next scene to start, even though everything you thought you knew is now completely flipped on its head. I let her sit in that silence. She deserved it. I didn't feel a rush of victory or triumph like I thought I might. Instead I felt calm. Like I'd already processed everything that had led me to this moment. The disbelief, the hurt, the betrayal. It had all been sucked out of me over weeks of watching her drift away. Of knowing something wasn't right but not having the proof to make it real. But now I had the proof. Now she couldn't pretend anymore. Finally she spoke. Her voice was soft, shaky. "James, please, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." It was such a typical response. It didn't hit me the way I thought it would. There was no anger in my chest, no fire in my belly, just emptiness. A sense of finality. It felt like everything that needed to be said had already been said in the silence. Her words didn't change anything. Didn't mean to? I asked, my tone dry, almost amused. I didn't want to sound bitter, but I couldn't help it. You didn't mean for it to happen? You didn't mean to hurt me? Is that really what you're going with? She didn't answer right away. She looked down at the table, hands clasped together tightly, as if she were trying to hold herself together. I could tell she was fighting back tears, but there was something more in her eyes. Something deeper. Not guilt, but fear. Fear that I might do something rash. Fear that she might lose everything. I'm so sorry, she repeated, her voice cracking. I don't know what came over me. Jack, he listened to me. He understood me, James. And things at home, they got so lonely. I stared at her, keeping my face as neutral as I could. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to tell her how pathetic that sounded. To remind her of everything we'd built together, the trust we'd shared, and how quickly she'd torn it all down for some temporary escape. But I didn't. I just nodded slowly, processing everything she said, trying to stay calm. I get it, I said after a pause. You felt lonely. You felt neglected. But this is how you dealt with it. I gestured at the phone, the images of her with Jack still glaring up at her. She flinched, and for a moment I almost thought she might cry. But then she caught herself, shaking her head. I don't know, James. I don't know why I did it. I was stupid. I was selfish. Yeah, I said, the words coming out almost too easily. You were? She took a deep breath, as though trying to steel herself. Her hands were still shaking, and I could see her trying to formulate a response. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to destroy what we had. I laughed softly, almost to myself. What we had is gone, Laura. You tore it down yourself. Her eyes widened, and for the first time since this whole conversation started, I saw real regret in her face. I know, she whispered. I know. I'm so sorry. I didn't want this. I never wanted to lose you. I didn't say anything for a moment. There wasn't much to say. The damage was done. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about everything that had led up to it. The lies, the distance, the avoidance. The fact that we'd been living in the same house but not really living together. I could feel it, and now she could too. She realized, maybe for the first time, that it wasn't just about what happened with Jack. It was about the fact that, somewhere along the way, we'd both stopped trying. What now? I asked. The question sounded so flat, almost detached. Laura took another deep breath, her eyes darting around as if she was looking for a way out. I don't know. I don't know what to say, James. I don't want to lose you. I love you. I know I've messed everything up, but please, I don't want this to be the end. It was strange hearing her say that. I love you, like it was some magic phrase that could fix everything. I didn't know if she truly meant it anymore, or if she was just trying to save face. I didn't know if I could ever believe her again. Do you? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Do you still love me, Laura? Because the way I see it, you didn't care enough to stop yourself before it went this far. So, I'm wondering, do you even know what love really is? She didn't have an answer for that. I didn't expect her to. The conversation dragged on for a while after that, but it wasn't really a conversation anymore. It was just her apologizing and me listening. Me nodding. Me trying to stay in control, trying not to let my emotions get the best of me. But I could feel them bubbling underneath, wanting to come out. It took everything in me not to shout at her, not to tell her how much she had hurt me, how much I felt like a fool. But I kept my cool even when she reached out to touch my arm. I'll leave, she said quietly, almost defeated. I'll leave if that's what you want. I understand if you never want to see me again. I didn't say anything. I didn't even look at her. My eyes were fixed on my hands, which were resting on the table. I hadn't moved them in what felt like hours. No, I finally said, looking her in the eye. You don't get to leave just yet. You don't get to make that decision. Not until you understand what you've done. She froze, her lips trembling again. What do you mean? I'm not angry, I said, keeping my voice low level. I'm not going to yell or throw things. That's not what I want. But you need to understand the weight of what you've done. And that's not something I'm going to teach you in an hour or a day. It's something you're going to have to figure out on your own. Laura sat back, nodding slowly as if the weight of my words were finally sinking in. There were tears in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not yet. We'll talk about this later, I said. Right now, I need space. I need time. And so do you? She nodded again, her voice barely audible. I understand. As I watched her leave that night, part of me wanted to scream at her, to chase after her and demand that she explain herself. But I didn't. Instead, I just let her walk away. I let her go because I knew that this was only the beginning. What came next wouldn't be about yelling or cursing. It would be about showing her, in the most painful way possible, the consequences of what she'd done. And that was going to take time. A lot of it. The days after Laura left that night felt strange. Like walking through a fog, just barely aware of what was in front of me, but also somehow not caring enough to focus. She'd said she needed time to think, that she was going to stay with her sister for a while to clear her head. A part of me didn't want her to leave, didn't want her to go somewhere else to escape the mess we'd created. But I didn't stop her. I figured, hell, if she needed a place to run, let her. I didn't have the energy to fight her on it. I was still processing everything. Trying to make sense of what had happened, what was going to happen next. The house felt empty without her, but it wasn't the kind of emptiness that made me feel sad or desperate. It wasn't that crushing silence that comes when you're missing someone you truly love. No, it was a different kind of silence, one that felt almost freeing. It was a reminder that I didn't need to pretend anymore. I didn't need to act like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. She'd taken the first step in ending things, whether she realized it or not. And now it was just a matter of letting it all unfold. For the first few days I didn't do much. I didn't call her. Didn't text. Didn't try to reach out. I didn't need to. I wasn't in a hurry to fix things or make decisions. I didn't want to jump into some half-assed attempt at salvaging a marriage that had already fallen apart. I had learned one thing through this whole mess. When trust breaks, it's not something you just glue back together with a couple of apologies and promises. It doesn't work like that. And if I was going to move forward, whether it was with Laura or without her, I needed to be sure of where I stood. I spent a lot of time thinking about what she'd said that night. The "I love you" and "I'm sorry" The way she begged for another chance. How guilty she looked. For a brief moment I thought I could forgive her. Maybe. It would have been easy to just fall back into the same old rhythm, to let her think she could fix everything with her words. But something inside me knew better. I didn't want to be a fool again. I didn't want to go back to pretending like nothing had happened. But I also didn't want to cut her off completely, at least not yet. The weird thing was, even after all of this, I still wanted to understand her. I still wanted to know what had pushed her to make such a reckless decision. Was it really just loneliness? Was that it? Was it that easy? She'd always been the ambitious one, the driven one. She was good at what she did. Really good. Too good sometimes. But I had always admired that about her. I admired her confidence, her ability to light up a room, her intelligence. She was one of the most talented marketers I knew. Hell, she'd earned everything she had, worked hard for it. And yet, she had made a choice, an unforgivable one, that tore apart everything we'd built. What bothered me the most wasn't the affair itself, it was the betrayal of trust. The fact that she had let it get so far. If she had come to me even halfway through, told me she was struggling, told me she felt like we were drifting apart, maybe I could have done something. Maybe we could have fixed things. But she didn't. She chose to lie, to hide, to keep it all a secret. That was the part one couldn't forgive. Not the fact that she'd been with Jack, but that she had betrayed me in ways I couldn't even begin to count. It wasn't long before she reached out. Of course she did. I knew it was coming. I didn't return her calls at first. I didn't want to hear the "I miss you" or the "let's talk" that I knew were coming. I needed time. Time to think, time to figure out if I could even look at her without feeling sick. Time to process what had happened, not just to us but to me. Because this was no longer just about her. It was about what I had lost, what I was willing to fight for, and what I was finally willing to let go of. But eventually I did pick up the phone. One morning, about a week after she'd left, I saw her name flash across the screen. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and answered. "James?" Her voice was tentative, almost uncertain. "Yeah. I just wanted to check in. I miss you." I didn't respond right away. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to sound cold, but I also didn't want to give her false hope. "I miss you too," I said finally, because I did. I missed who we were before everything changed. I missed the person I thought I knew. But I wasn't going to lie. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice cracking slightly. I know I've messed up. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but please, can we just talk? Face to face. I owe you that much, don't I?" I sighed, rubbing my face with one hand. "We've already talked. You've apologized. You've said what you needed to say. I don't think there's much more to discuss." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear the desperation in her voice when she spoke again. "I'm not asking for everything to go back to the way it was. I don't want to lose you, James. Please." I felt it again, the old part of me that still wanted to believe in us, in her. The part of me that wanted to fix things, that didn't want to throw everything away. But then I remembered the truth. The truth that she had been with Jack, that she had hidden it from me, that she had betrayed the foundation of everything we'd built. I don't know, Laura, I said, my voice quieter this time. I just don't know. The conversation didn't go much further than that. She tried to convince me, but I could hear the hesitation in her voice. I could tell that she wasn't sure what she wanted either. Maybe she didn't want to lose me, but I wasn't sure if she really understood the gravity of what had happened. I wasn't sure if she truly realized what it meant to break someone's trust like that. I told her I needed more time. And I did. I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. I didn't want to rush into a conversation that would end up being another empty cycle of apologies and promises that would only fall apart again. What came next wasn't about being angry anymore. It wasn't about confronting her, throwing things in her face, or punishing her. It was about figuring out if there was any way we could rebuild what we had, and more importantly, whether I even wanted to. But I wasn't going to wait around forever. I wasn't going to just sit and wonder if she'd change. I knew I had to make a decision soon. Because no matter how much I cared about her or how much I thought I could forgive her, the truth was this: I had already started to move on. Even if it was just a little bit, even if I didn't fully realize it yet, part of me had already let her go. And maybe that was the hardest part of all. A few days after Laura and I had that conversation, I knew things weren't going to get any easier. The longer we stayed in this weird limbo, the more I realized I wasn't looking for closure or reconciliation anymore. I wasn't interested in rebuilding something that had already crumbled. I knew I had to make a move, but I didn't want it to be a typical, emotional outburst. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. Instead, I needed something clever, something calculated, something that would make her feel what I'd been feeling all this time. I knew I couldn't just let the affair slide, not after everything that had happened. But I wasn't about to take the high road and just walk away either. That didn't sit right with me. If there was one thing I'd learned from this mess, it was that I wasn't some passive bystander. I had been hurt, and I wanted her to understand that. I wanted her to feel the weight of the betrayal, not just with words, but with the kind of cold, ironic reality that would make her see what she had done. I started planning my next move quietly. I didn't rush into it, didn't make any impulsive decisions. Instead, I sat back and thought about it. Thought about how I could use the one thing she wouldn't expect: her own vanity. The idea came to me one evening when I was scrolling through social media. One of the many distractions I used to kill time. Laura had always been obsessed with image, her own and others. She liked the attention. She liked the idea of being admired. And she had always been so proud of her career, her success, her polished life. If there was one thing I knew about her, it was that she craved validation. That's when I thought of it. What if I could use that? What if I could give her exactly what she wanted in a way that she'd never expect? What if I could turn the tables on her and make her think that someone completely new, was interested in her? Someone successful, someone sophisticated, someone who knew how to play the game. That's when I started the process of creating the fake identity. It didn't take much to set up, just a new email, a fake social media account, and a few simple details. I made up a name, Ethan Rivers, and crafted a backstory for him. A successful businessman in his early 40s who had been through a painful divorce. I made him seem worldly and experienced, someone who had seen the ups and downs of life. The kind of person Laura would find intriguing. I made sure his photos were professional, not too flashy, but just polished enough to seem believable. It was a strange feeling, creating this other persona. I wasn't pretending to be someone I wanted to be, I was pretending to be the kind of man I knew would catch Laura's attention. And when I started messaging her, I didn't make it obvious that I was trying to manipulate her. I didn't come at her with accusations. I didn't dive right into some "hey, I know you're married" confrontation. No, I let it build slowly, like a game, a little flirtation here and there, and over time a connection would form. At first, I just sent her a simple message. I kept it casual, like I was just another guy looking to connect. "Hey, I saw your profile and I have to say I'm impressed. Your work in marketing is incredible. I know how tough this industry can be, and it's great to see someone who's so driven." I didn't expect much in return, but within a couple of hours she responded. I hadn't seen her this quick to reply in ages, and that alone told me everything I needed to know. "Thanks, Ethan," she wrote. "That means a lot. I'm always trying to push the boundaries of what we do in this field." The conversation slowly started to build from there. I played the part of a businessman who was recently divorced, someone who understood the complexities of relationships and the challenges that came with them. I knew I had to be subtle, just enough to make her intrigued, to make her want to know more. The last thing I wanted was for her to catch on too quickly. After a few days of chatting online, I slowly began to share a little about myself. Not too much, just enough to seem relatable but not too personal. I mentioned my business background, how I'd worked hard to rebuild my life after a messy divorce. I made sure to keep it vague, not giving away too many details. The key was to make her curious, to make her wonder what else I had to offer. What surprised me, though, was how quickly she warmed up to me. I had expected her to be cautious at first, considering her situation with me and Jack, but she wasn't. If anything, she seemed eager to keep the conversation going. She'd send long messages, sometimes late at night, and would reply to my texts almost instantly. It was clear she was enjoying the attention, and I couldn't help but feel a strange satisfaction in knowing that I was the one giving it to her. Eventually, I dropped in the idea of meeting in person. It wasn't direct at first, just a casual suggestion. I'm always amazed at how people can build these amazing careers, but sometimes we forget to take time for ourselves. Maybe we should grab a coffee sometime just to talk shop or whatever. I didn't think she'd bite right away, but she did. Her response was quick, almost eager. I'd love that. Maybe you can give me some advice on how to navigate this next phase of my career. I'm sure you've got plenty of stories to share. I could feel the anticipation growing in me. The plan was working. Slowly but surely, I was pulling her into this web I'd spun. And when I agreed to meet her in person, I wasn't planning to just have a casual conversation. No, this was the point where everything would come to a head. This was when I would reveal myself. Not as her husband, not as James, but as Ethan, this smooth, worldly stranger who had all the things she'd been craving. I wasn't going to meet her and scream or make a scene. I wasn't going to be petty. I was going to do it calmly, coolly. I was going to show her what it felt like to be caught off guard, to have someone expose you in the most unexpected way. By the time we set a date to meet in person, I had already put everything in place. The message, the photo, the fake account, it was all there. I was ready for her to walk into this trap. I was ready to see the look on her face when she realized that she had just fallen into the very thing she had tried so desperately to hide from me. And when the day came, I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of satisfaction. This wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. This wasn't about tearing her down or humiliating her. It was about showing her the consequences of her choices, about making her understand, on a deeper level, what it meant to betray someone who had loved her with everything he had. Because if there was one thing I'd learned from all of this, it was that actions have a way of coming full circle. And Laura was about to feel the weight of that truth, whether she liked it or not. It was a Thursday when it finally happened. The day we were supposed to meet. I had been counting down the hours, feeling this strange sense of calm wash over me. The kind of calm you get before a storm breaks, when you've done everything you can to prepare and now all that's left is to watch it unfold. I'd picked the place carefully, a quiet, upscale cafe on the outskirts of the city. Not too flashy, not too casual, just the kind of place where people could have a conversation without being interrupted, without being noticed. The perfect setting for a slow reveal. I'd arrived early, of course. I didn't want to rush this. I didn't want any distractions. As I sat at the table, sipping my coffee, I could almost hear the ticking of the clock in my head, counting down to when she'd walk in. A part of me felt almost detached, like I was watching this play out from a distance. This wasn't about me anymore, or at least, it wasn't about the version of me that had once loved her. This was about something bigger. About her realizing the cost of her actions. About making sure she understood that there were consequences, real, undeniable consequences, for what she had done. And then there she was. She walked in with that confident stride, looking around the cafe like she always did when she entered a room. She was beautiful, there was no denying that. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless, and she was wearing that outfit I knew she thought made her look irresistible. I could see the way she carried herself, the way she scanned the room for any hint of recognition. When she saw me, she smiled, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She knew something was off. I could feel it in the way she hesitated before walking toward me. "Ethan?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was a hint of wariness to it. She hadn't called me by my fake name in weeks. The closer we got to this meeting, the more I could tell she'd started to wonder if she'd misjudged me, if there was something I wasn't saying. "Yeah," I said, standing to greet her. I smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile you give when you know you've already won. "It's good to finally meet you in person, Laura." Her eyes widened slightly at the sound of my voice saying her name. For a second I thought she might ask what the hell I was doing there, but she didn't. Instead, she sat down across from me, her posture straight but tense, as if she was still unsure of what was going on. "So, how've you been?" she asked, trying to play it casual, but I could see the nerves creeping in, the way her hands fidgeted with her coffee cup. I leaned back in my chair, looking at her with a kind of studied indifference. "I've been good," I said, my voice even. Been keeping busy. Work life, you know how it is. There was a moment of silence as I let her squirm just a little. She didn't know what to say next, and I could tell she was trying to piece things together in her mind. I wasn't the Ethan she'd been chatting with online. She was starting to figure it out. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I was thinking about what we talked about. About how people can get caught up in the wrong things sometimes. How easy it is to fall into patterns that don't make any sense. She blinked, her lips parting as if she was about to say something, but I cut her off before she could. But I guess it's not so easy to get out of those patterns once you're in them, is it? I saw her eyes flicker just for a second, but it was enough. She was beginning to understand. Ethan, what are you? She trailed off, her voice quiet, unsure now. I took a slow, deliberate breath and leaned forward, giving her the kind of look I knew would stop her heart for a second. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was calm. Calm with the knowledge that I had her right where I wanted her. Actually, I said, I'm not Ethan. Her expression shifted immediately, her face went pale, her eyes wide as she stared at me. I let the silence hang between us for a moment, savoring it, watching the realization start to sink in. I'm James, I said, the name hanging in the air like a weight. Your husband. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. It was almost comical how quickly she went from confident to completely lost. The woman who had kept this secret from me for weeks, the one who had looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine, now had no idea what to do. She was caught and she knew it. I don't understand, she stammered, looking at me like I was some sort of ghost. James, what the hell is going on? I pulled out my phone slowly, scrolling through the messages I'd saved from her conversations with Jack. I'd taken screenshots of the texts, the ones where they talked about meeting at hotels, about their plans. I'd even saved the photo she'd sent him. One of her, smiling, her arm around him in some hotel lobby. The photo that had confirmed everything I needed to know. I slid my phone across the table to her and she didn't move. Her eyes flicked from me to the screen, and I could see the color drain from her face as she saw the evidence staring back at her. Now you understand how it feels, don't you? I said, my voice soft but cutting. There was no need for shouting, no need for drama. She had done all the work for me. She had already humiliated herself enough. For a few moments she just stared at the screen. She didn't say anything, didn't try to defend herself. I don't think she could. What could she say? What was there to say when everything she had done was right there, in black and white and in full color? I'm so sorry, she whispered after a long pause, her voice cracking. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't flinch. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't even feel the urge to reach out to her. This wasn't about her. This was about me, about making her see the consequences of her choices. I know you are, I said, shaking my head. But sorry doesn't fix this, Laura. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. Sorry doesn't bring back trust. Sorry doesn't stop someone from feeling like a damn fool. She opened her mouth again, probably to say something, but I stopped her with a raised hand. You're not getting out of this with a few more tears and a couple more apologies. You already gave me those. You gave me 1,000 of them over the last few weeks, and look where that got us. Her eyes dropped to the table, and for the first time, she didn't look like the confident, successful woman I had once admired. She looked small. Vulnerable. Why, Laura? I asked, my voice finally losing its edge, softening just a bit. Why did you do it? What was it about Jack that was worth this? Worth losing everything? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out for a long time. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. I was lost. I was confused. I thought I was doing the right thing. I chuckled, the sound dry and bitter. The right thing? By throwing everything away? By lying to me? By thinking you could get away with it? She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew there was no way to justify it. Not now. Not here. I sat back in my chair, taking a long sip of my coffee. You were lost, huh? I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. Well, I guess that makes two of us. The weeks after that meeting were a blur. It's strange how quickly everything can shift when one moment changes everything. For a while, I didn't really know what I was supposed to feel. I didn't feel like I had won, even though in some way I had. I didn't feel a sense of triumph or satisfaction like I thought I would. Instead, I felt nothing. It was as if I'd emptied out all my emotions in that one moment and had nothing left. The anger, the frustration, the hurt, they were all gone. And in their place, there was just a quiet, gnawing emptiness. Laura didn't speak to me for a few days after our meeting. I wasn't surprised. What could she say? Her world had just collapsed and she didn't know how to put it back together. We'd been married for almost 10 years. I had been everything to her, her partner, her confidant, the one person she'd promised to share her life with. And now, all of that was shattered by her own choices, her own actions. She had done this to herself. The first time she reached out, it was a text. A long one, full of apologies and regret. She said she was sorry, that she didn't know how she had gotten so lost, that she was still trying to figure things out. She even tried to justify the affair, talking about how Jack had given her the attention she needed, how she'd been lonely and drifting. It was all the same excuses she'd given me before. The same tired narrative she had tried to sell for weeks. But I didn't respond to that text. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a conversation. She had already spoken her truth, she had already shown me who she was. I didn't need to hear any more of it. A few days later she tried calling me. I didn't pick up. I knew what it would be, more apologies, more explanations, and none of it would change anything. What was the point? What could she possibly say that would make this right? That would undo the months of lies, the deceit, the way she had made me feel like I wasn't enough? Instead, I just kept moving through my days. I went to work, I went home, I did my thing. I kept my routine steady because at least that was one thing I could control. At night, when the house was quiet, I would sit on the couch, staring at the TV, not really watching anything. Just letting my mind wander to places it shouldn't go. But that was okay. I wasn't ready to deal with it yet. Then, after a week of silence, I got the letter. It came by mail, sealed in an envelope with her handwriting on it. I didn't open it immediately. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the envelope, knowing what it was. I didn't need to read it to know what she was going to say. I'd seen it all before. The promises of change. The regret. The empty words. But I opened it anyway. The letter was long, longer than I expected. She talked about everything. About how much she regretted the affair, how much she regretted the distance between us, how she felt she had lost herself along the way. She apologized for the lies, for the way she had hurt me, for the way she had allowed things to spiral out of control. And in the end, she asked for forgiveness. She said she wanted to try again, that she still loved me, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. I read it once. Then I read it again. And the more I read it, the more I realized how much she didn't understand. She thought forgiveness was a simple thing, something you could ask for and receive like a gift wrapped in a bow. But it wasn't that simple. It wasn't about asking for forgiveness. It was about earning it, about showing that you could change, that you could truly regret what you'd done and be willing to put in the work to make it right. And I knew deep down that I couldn't do that. I couldn't just forget. I couldn't act like nothing had happened and pick up where we left off. The trust between us was gone. The love had been poisoned. What she had done to me, to us, was irreparable. I didn't write her back. I didn't say anything. I just let the letter sit on the table for a few days, gathering dust. Eventually, I filed it away with the rest of the things she had left behind, the notes, the trinkets, the reminders of what we had once been, the things I would never need again. A few more weeks went by and I could see the cracks forming. I saw it in the way Laura started acting. She was trying to be normal, trying to get back to the way things used to be. But it wasn't working. She wasn't working. She had no idea how to fix what she had broken, and neither did I. Every time she came near me, I could feel the weight of her guilt pressing down on both of us. It was suffocating. It was making it harder and harder to be in the same room without feeling like we were both wearing masks, pretending that everything was okay when we both knew it wasn't. Finally, about a month after I had confronted her, she came to me. This time it wasn't a letter. It wasn't a text. It wasn't even a phone call. She stood in front of me in the living room, just staring at me like she was waiting for me to make a decision. She was no longer apologizing. She wasn't asking for forgiveness anymore. What she was doing was something I hadn't expected. She was letting me go. "I can't do this anymore, James," she said, her voice shaky. "I can't pretend. I don't even know who I am anymore. I've messed up everything. I've messed up us." I don't know why, but hearing her say it out loud was a relief. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't some triumph over her. But it was a relief. It was the end. The final chapter. There was no more pretending. No more trying to make things work when we both knew they never would. "Yeah," I said, finally looking her in the eye. "I don't think either of us can do this anymore." And just like that, she filed for divorce. The paperwork came a few weeks later, and I signed it without hesitation. There were no fights, no big confrontations. No courtroom drama. We both knew what had to be done. We were done. The divorce wasn't even the hardest part. The hardest part was the silence that followed. The absence of someone you thought you'd spend your life with, the person you had built a future around. But in the end, it was for the best. Laura needed to figure herself out. She needed to understand that what she had done had consequences that went far beyond the affair. As for me, well, I learned something through all of this. I learned that love, trust, and loyalty aren't just words you throw around. They're actions. They're commitments. And once you break them, they're not so easy to fix. But I also learned that sometimes the best way to deal with betrayal isn't to fight fire with fire. It's to take a step back and let things unfold as they will. Because in the end, they always do. The silence after the divorce was both a blessing and a curse. The first few weeks I was kind of numb. It wasn't exactly relief, but it wasn't pain either. It was a void, a space where everything had once been and now just wasn't. I spent a lot of time sitting alone in the house, staring out the window, trying to figure out what the hell had happened. Trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't wrap my head around how we had gone from being this happy, functional couple to complete strangers. How something that had once felt so right could fall apart so completely. I started to clean. I threw out things we'd accumulated over the years, the old pictures, the mementos, the things that used to mean something. Things that now just felt heavy, like reminders of a past I didn't want anymore. It felt like clearing the space in my home was somehow clearing the space in my mind. I wasn't ready to forgive her. I don't think I ever would be. But I was ready to move on. Work became a refuge. I'd always been good at my job, and in some ways, it became the only thing that kept me grounded. I buried myself in numbers, in spreadsheets, in the monotonous tasks that didn't ask anything of me. I didn't need to explain myself to anyone there. I didn't need to justify why I looked a little tired or why I wasn't as chatty as I used to be. I could just exist. I could get through my day without thinking about anything beyond what was right in front of me. But of course there were moments when it all crept back in. I'd be sitting at my desk and suddenly, I'd remember a conversation Laura and I had years ago. A joke we made, a trip we planned, the way we had made plans for a future that now didn't even exist. And those moments would hit me like a brick. I'd feel that old ache in my chest, like something had been ripped out of me and left in its place a hole that would never really heal. I wasn't angry anymore. That much I could say. The rage had burned itself out. But the hurt was still there, and it wasn't something I could just ignore. There were days when I felt like I was carrying that hurt around like a weight, heavy and unyielding. Other days I felt like I was floating, like I could finally breathe again, like the air wasn't quite so thick with all the things I had kept inside for so long. It was about a month after the divorce was finalized when I ran into her again. It was at the grocery store. I just grabbed a cart, heading down the produce aisle when I saw her. She was standing there, examining a bunch of bananas with this look on her face like she was trying to decide if they were ripe enough or if she should just walk away and pretend she never even needed them in the first place. It wasn't planned. I wasn't expecting to see her. Hell, I hadn't even thought about her much over the past few weeks. But there she was, standing in front of me, looking almost like she hadn't changed. Like nothing had happened. She looked up and saw me almost immediately, and for a split second we just stood there, staring at each other. It was like time had frozen. Like we were still in that moment when we had first sat down at that cafe weeks ago, when everything was still up in the air. There were a million things I could have said to her in that moment, but none of them seemed right. None of them seemed worth saying. "James," she said, her voice quiet but strained. Her eyes were a little red, like she had been crying, but she was trying to hold it together. "Hey Laura," I said. I didn't feel anything in that moment. Not anger. Not sadness. Just a strange, detached calm. "How are you?" She shifted a little, her fingers tightening around the edge of her cart. She didn't look at me directly at first. Instead, her eyes scanned the aisle, like she was looking for a way out, but there was no escape. Not this time. "I'm okay," she said, the words sounding hollow. "I've been trying to figure things out." I nodded. I didn't really have anything to add to that. There was no point in asking what she had been figuring out. I already knew. She was trying to come to terms with what she had done, with the fact that she had destroyed something good. Trying to find a way to make sense of her own mistakes. "I saw your email," she continued, her voice cracking a little. "I know you don't want to talk. I know I hurt you, and I don't even know if there's a way to fix it." I looked at her for a moment, trying to find the words, but they didn't come. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to. I didn't need her to fix anything. I didn't need her to apologize again. I didn't need anything from her anymore. "I don't think there's anything to fix," I said. "It's done. It's over." Her face went pale at that, like I'd hit her with something sharp. She opened her mouth to say something, but she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, looking at me as if she were waiting for me to offer her some kind of lifeline. But I didn't. "I don't hate you," I added, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. "I don't even blame you anymore. I just Don't think we can be what we were. She nodded, the tears finally falling from her eyes. But she didn't try to stop them. She didn't wipe them away. She just let them fall, her face twisting in a way I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the confident, put-together woman I had married. It was the woman who had been broken by her own choices, by her own regrets. "I'm sorry, James," she whispered. "I don't know if you'll ever forgive me for this. But I am sorry." I stared at her for a long moment, not sure what I was supposed to say. I wasn't ready to forgive her. Not then, not ever. But I knew one thing for sure: I had to let her go. For both of us. For my own peace, and for her to find whatever it was she needed to find. "I know," I said softly. "I know." And then I walked away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The past was behind me. And so was she. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making her suffer for what she had done. It was about me learning to let go of the anger, the hurt, the betrayal. About walking away from the life we had and moving on to something else. Something different. Because the truth was, I had to save myself. And in the end, I did. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.